Thank you, Y Labs, for the invite. Hi, everyone. I'm Maya Wilson. I'm the Director of Data Science at Intuit Mailchimp. Before I joined Mailchimp a little less than 3 years ago, I was a data scientist and product manager at Axio. We're an early stage cybersecurity risk management firm. And before that, I was a social scientist at Emory. So I think a lot about research design and measurement strategy. At Mailchimp, you may have heard of us. We build email marketing software. We were acquired by Intuit a little over a year ago, and we joined QuickBooks in the small business unit, small business and self-employed unit, to be the center of small business growth. At Mailchimp, I lead the team that builds the data science models behind the user-facing features. So as you can imagine, we've been thinking about content generation for a while. We actually deployed our first text generation model back in 2020, Preview Text Generator. And since then, we have deployed subject line generation, header and subheader generation, and alt text generation for images. We have kind of a combination of models that run those. We have some that we've built in-house. Some use other open source models, and some of them use GPT-3. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our experiences using GPT-3. It produces kind of an interesting set of considerations relative to the user experience and the applications. So looking forward to talking with you about that today. So GPT-3 presents kind of some interesting opportunities and risks in the generative text space. So I'm going to talk about some of the applications where it may or may not be appropriate. I'm also going to talk about how we think about accuracy in the context of our applications and for our users, and specifically how we approach continuous improvement given the unique challenges with GPT-3. I'm going to lead on how we use humans in the loop. I think this is a really important piece of the puzzle for generative AI overall. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how we leverage measuring and monitoring to ensure that we maintain a positive user experience and we get the visibility into the way these models are interacting with our users in practice. All right, so to start, GPT-3, I imagine almost everyone on this call has heard about it. It was released in 2020 by OpenAI. It produces human-like text with really impressive results. It is truly a phenomenal model, not perfect, but phenomenal. It is trained to predict the next word on a large data set of internet text. It's really easy to use in products. This is, I think, one of the coolest things about it. It has truly democratized the ability to produce generative text models for your users. Before, it would take a large team of data scientists. Back in 2020, when we deployed our first one, it was not GPT-3. And it took a lot to get that first model out. Now it's really become available to engineers and designers, and it doesn't take a whole data science team to get these things out in front of users, and that's really exciting. It does have some known limitations, though, and particularly relevant to our users, it can tend to sound generic. It is not often specific to particular use cases. It may not know your users very well. So this is a risk that we're aware of here. It can also lack knowledge of events after 2020 because it was trained in 2020. And so there's some kind of context missing. Critically, it is not open source. It is available on demand, but it creates a lack of visibility that's kind of unique to GPT-3. And another concern is that it has a tendency to do what's called hallucinating, which is effectively imposing fiction in a way that looks like fact. This is totally understandable given the way that it's trained and what it's intended to do. But it is a concern for product teams, and specifically ones where facts really matter. So for a kind of comical example of this hallucination issue, I asked one of the many GPT-3 driven products out there to write me an outline for this talk specifically. And in this kind of funny sense of irony, it actually got wrong what GPT-3 itself does, because GPT-3 is not, in fact, a human emotion facial detection algorithm. In another iteration of this same type of outline, it told me that GPT-3 had been around for decades, which we also know is not true. So this is something that you'll need to consider in the types of applications that you want to do with GPT-3. And relatedly, the maturity required of AI is going to vary by its application type. So if you look, we're all the way on the left over here. We're generating marketing text. And I think what's really critical here is that our use case is intended to save our users time and give them inspiration. It is not intended to represent fact. We're not giving them advice. And critically, it's not operating autonomously. Our users are empowered to make decisions on behalf of their business, and the AI is just a tool. As you move farther right, legal, finance, medical applications, the stakes get higher. Facts matter more in these applications. And while I think the future is very bright for these unique applications, we're not quite there yet. I think it's important to recognize that the maturity required of this AI um, isn't there for these kind of more autonomous, more specialized places where getting facts wrong can really impact people's lives. I want to be really clear that today I'm talking about the far end marketing applications and writing marketing text. And super critically, and I'll talk more about this, our users fact check every single piece of generated text before it goes out into the world. They are subject matter experts and they're involved in our process in a way that is really important to improving our models over time and also ensuring that we're not putting bad content out into the world. For example, GPT-3 is notoriously bad at math. So when you think about these applications where we're giving advice or potentially, you know, there is a ground truth that needs to be recognized, GPT-3 is not ready to operate autonomously here yet. CNET, this is a true screenshot, got in trouble last week because they wrote about 75 articles using GPT-3 and they weren't adequately fact checked before they went out. In this one article that was relatively short, there were 5 meaningful inaccuracies. One of them is highlighted here. And while I kind of doubt anyone went bankrupt thinking that they would truly more than double their money with a 3% interest rate over the course of a year, CNET definitely lost their users' trust and credibility because they weren't involved enough in the process using this AI. Okay, so what does accuracy mean for marketing text? This is actually one of the questions that gets me the most excited about my job because I think there's some really interesting opportunities to think about, not only doing right by our users, but also improving outcomes for them. But you might say, all right, Maya, well, if you're just trying to help your users save time, shouldn't you just be producing what the user would have produced themselves? Isn't that accurate? Well, not really, because we actually want to be producing better content than our users would be producing themselves. So we can't just kind of compare what the user would have done versus what our AI would have done. We also think about this in a few different dimensions, like, did we get the content right? Subject lines are intended to look different than alt text. Alt text is supposed to be a description of what's in the picture. It's not supposed to be an Instagram caption. So the actual application matters a lot. Now, fortunately for us, the way we deploy these models, we actually build gathering feedback into the design. So OpenAI provides this wonderful model, GPT-3, to us. We provide it to our users, and then our users interact with it. They can accept the suggestions, they can edit our suggestions, and then send, or they can flat out reject our suggestions. We think about rejection as either they have completely deleted the text that we suggested, or maybe they don't send text in that spot at all. Say we suggest preview text, they say, nope, I don't need preview text. That's what we consider a failure here. So there's a lot of metrics that we can gather based on this user involvement. Some of the ways that we think about this is related to semantic similarity. Did we get the content right? And so we use cosine similarity here. Jacquard similarity is another metric you could use. But this really looks at the semantic meaning of what we suggested to our user versus what the user ultimately ended up sending. And so we may find that, they've meaningfully changed the content. And we may say, hey, maybe we didn't get what that text was supposed to be doing correct. Now you could think about a summary. There's kind of a ground truth there. You summarized the thing correctly or you didn't. But for a lot of the stuff, there's not really a ground truth. There's not really a meaningful correct answer. There are definitely wrong answers, but understanding kind of how close we're getting to that overall ideal state is really helpful to use these metrics like semantic similarity. The other thing that our users care about a lot is their brand voice. This is really important to them, and this is kind of one of the risks of AI is overall sounding generic. We know that no one wants to sound generic, and particularly small businesses. And so we look at edit distance. This is the distance, the number of edits that it would take to change their text, our text to their text. This is kind of an unbounded metric, so we end up normalizing it to between 0 and 1. And these are like not only metrics that we use to measure how well we're doing, but also we monitor these over time as kind of health metrics for our models. So we aim to be in the bottom right quadrant, high semantic similarity, low edit distance. You can imagine some cases where, for example, the semantic similarity is high, but we got their voice wrong. So they changed a bunch of words in there to make it sound more like them, even if the content is accurate. And you can imagine kind of the inverse scenario as well, that maybe we've done, not a great job with the semantic similarity, but we kind of got their voice right. So we watch these over time as a way to continually improve. So what do we do with this feedback? As many of you know, the typical data science model improvement cycle involves building and deploying models, measuring performance, and then capturing that feedback. We want to incorporate that learning in kind of a continuous feedback loop to continue improving the models over time. Well, GPT-3 has made this a bit harder. For one, we don't build the model. We are able to measure performance and capture feedback, like I discussed, but privacy concerns actually prevent us from fine-tuning. We worry a lot about privacy and respecting our users' data at Intuit Mailchimp, and fine-tuning at this point, we worry that it's going to risk data leakage, that one user's information is going to show up in the generated text of another. So we are not doing this. So, all right, where does the data science come in? Now I've just told you that we're using directly the GPT-3 model that OpenAI provides, and we're just providing it to our users like Business Bird here. So where does the data science come in? Rather than focusing on improving the model itself, we're shifting our focus to improving the way that we use the model. We think about this in terms of pre and post processing, and critically in terms of using the right prompts. So I'm going to talk in a little bit about how we do prompt optimization. But first, I want to talk about where the humans come in. In particular, where do the data scientists come in? But also, how do our users fit into this cycle, and how does the rest of the team go? So, humans in the loop. This is a really important theme, especially with generative AI. It is just sufficiently new that having eyes on it is so important to creating a positive user experience. And we do this in a few ways. At the model development phase, we have a team that looks over all of our results. And so this is just often pulled from random places in the company. These are internal Mailchimp employees who are willing to generously donate some of their time to evaluating our model outputs. We sit them down, we look over using a hand labeling tool, and we look for sources of bias. We look for the quality of the inputs and the outputs. We understand where it's working and where it's working less well. And this also gives us an opportunity to know where we may need to be monitoring in the future to make sure that we're not kind of increasing the risk or increasing the occurrence. If we see sources of bias, we ensure that they're addressed before we've deployed the model. As I mentioned before, we have this awesome opportunity because we have our users in the app who are giving us feedback with every single prediction that we've put in front of them just by their behavior. So we also incorporate that information. We then look at all of that information. We take time to review where we're doing well, where we're not doing well, and we make adjustments to the prompt, to the processing, to the way the user experience is provided. Sometimes that means even just better instructions for the user about what this text is supposed to look like if we're seeing kind of a gap there. Our users also have the opportunity to give us thumbs up and thumbs down metrics. We look at every single piece of feedback. I wish every user would give it. They don't. But the ones that do take the time to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, we go and we look at that content and see why their experience was what it was. And finally, in the model monitoring phase, we ensure that the metrics that we're watching are improving over time, that we don't have any meaningful gaps or deterioration in the user experience. And if something happens, that we have the visibility to know that something has changed. Okay, So, what does this look like in practice? Well, I talked about how we're using OpenAI's model, we're not fine tuning it. But what we do is experiment with different ways to ask, different emphasis, and different prompts. And so, this is a way that we can kind of get at personalization without necessarily needing to train on a user's own data. So, something we think about a lot at Mailchimp is a user's brand voice. So, for example, we might ask for a joyful subject line for a bird feeder company. And all right, we get a joyful subject line. We might ask for a subject line for a bird feeder client, for bird feeder with fancy clients. Say our user thinks of themselves as kind of an elegant brand. This may end up sounding more like their voice. Alternately, maybe the way that we're asking GPT for a subject line isn't the right way to ask for it. So try something like a 7-word advertisement for bird feeders. So we get these options out and then we engage the user in the process. In this example, Business Bird has picked prompt number 1. He likes this one the best, and he goes in and he tweaks it a little bit. So maybe he thinks of his brand as joyful, but also urgent. He goes ahead and he adds a call to action here. We can measure the cosine similarity and the edit distance of the difference between what we suggested and what the user actually ends up sending. And we kind of track the comparison of these prompts over time. So, for example, here, prompt 1 was the winner. You can think of this kind of like a horse race. And so, over time, as Business Bird continues to interact with our different prompts, we're going to get some visibility into which ones are the most representative of his business and of his brand voice, and which ones are most accurately generating the content for that opportunity. Now, over time, we'll start to notice which ones are performing less and which ones are performing better. And we're going to go ahead and rotate in using those learnings, new ones over time to continue improving. There are ways to automate this additional layer itself. You could build models that would then suggest new prompts. At this point, our priority is explainability. And so we're doing this kind of manually at this point. But there's a ton of opportunities for building additional models to prompt optimize. And this is a great way to add personalization to the experience without asking your users to give you more data or even share more data. All right. So, monitoring. This is obviously a big topic for this group. And I think it's not only important to ensure that you're continually improving over time and getting closer to that kind of ground truth that you're seeking, but also that you're going to know if something goes wrong. It's critically important with models that you lack visibility into how they're trained, into how they're maintained. Like I mentioned before, GPT-3 is not open source. It's not the kind of thing that you can interact with directly. So if something changes on OpenAI's side, you may not know in time to prevent that from deteriorating your user experience. Some of the things that we monitor are average edit distance by application. I think it's important to call out that this isn't necessarily at the model level, but this is actually where in the app this shows up. We have a few different places that we generate headers and subheaders. And in the auto-generated design, we may be doing better than in the core email experience. And so really breaking those out and understanding what's making the experience better or worse for our users is going to allow us to continuously improve those over time. We also track model failures and errors. Obviously, you don't want to see an increase in those, but you also want to understand why your models are failing or they're erroring. Sometimes they're indicative of changes upstream or downstream in a way that could become a problem for you. There's issues like rate limits and things like that that you're going to need to pay attention to as well, in particular when you're using models that you use on demand. Um, we use OpenAI's moderation endpoint as well. So if we send content that is flagged for something that OpenAI doesn't want to be producing generated content for, we want to know that because we don't want to be sending that content at all. So when we get those, we're able to actually go look at what text was sent and understand those use cases so that we can prevent ever reaching that point in the future. And critically, we don't want to see increases in that. That would indicate something has gone wrong on our end and potentially in the user experience, and we probably need to evaluate that. Input and output drift, critically important here. If our models and the way that we're using them are expecting a set of a set block of text, and all of a sudden it starts getting bigger blocks of text or smaller blocks of text, that's probably going to make your user experience deteriorate. So understanding things like how big the sentences are that you get back and how big the sentences are that you put in can indicate if something has changed for the worse. Um, Relatedly, average counts, average number of words, average number of tokens. These are kind of health metrics that you want to make sure aren't meaningfully changing. And if they are, you know why, and you've addressed it. Um, in our kind of initial hand labeling phase, sometimes we identify potential sources of bias or concern. And for that, we want to be monitoring to make sure that those aren't changing over time, that we understand kind of the landscape there and that we have indicators of if that presents. So, for example, we know that with generated text models, imposed gender can be an issue. So, if this is a concern for you, you might consider measuring the ratio of gendered pronouns going in and gendered pronouns going out, or the raw counts of these things. But critically, if you've identified an issue using your team in the beginning, use monitoring to ensure that that's not meaningfully changing over time. And if it is, that you have the visibility to address it immediately. We make decisions sometimes using a confidence threshold. And so we don't ever want to put something in front of our users that we don't feel good about. In the context of, say, a prediction, this could just be a confidence in the prediction. And we might, pick, say, 0.8. Over 0.8, we feel like we can show it to user. Under 0.8, maybe we'll ask them to tell us before we show them our prediction. But picking those ratios is a bit of an art. And so anytime you're making these kinds of decisions, having the visibility to continually evaluate whether that was the right decision and whether that was the right ratio is really important. And then finally, you'll find there's often times that you have to make a decision at deployment when you don't quite have enough data. And I'll use an example. One of the things that we do is we ensure that we're not taking content for generation that has bad words in it or returning content that has bad words in it. And so we started with this big bad word list from Carnegie Mellon University. It's kind of the standard bad words list. And we went through this to decide which words may actually have a reasonable marketing application and we should go ahead and let them through. But as you can imagine, for some of those, we were a little bit on the fence and we err on the side of caution and we decided to block those. But we look at every case where we have withheld content to evaluate whether that was, in fact, an appropriate decision and whether we want to change those decisions on the pre and post processing side to better reflect the way that our users are using our products. So, all of this monitoring is really important to making sure that you are making the right decisions around thresholds and inclusion and exclusion, that you know if something has meaningfully changed before your users have a negative experience because of it, and that in general, you get the visibility that you need even when you haven't built the model yourself and you don't control it day to day. So I'm really happy to be here with this community who are also thinking about these really important challenges, especially in the space of generative AI. And I'm glad so many people care about this. So thank you so much to YLabs for the invitation. I'm not able to take questions live right now, but please feel free to email me. I love to talk about this stuff. I also want to point out that we are hiring in engineering and design. These are for teams that work really closely with my team on deploying these types of features and building measurement and monitoring strategies around it. So if this is something that you're interested in, please reach out. Thank you so much.